Hello, good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining us for our webinar, The Big Pivot, How Two Shifts in Product Strategy Can Turn Your Enterprise from Disrupted to Disruptor. I'm going to cover just a few quick housekeeping reminders before we get started. We'll be taking questions via the Zoom Q&A function, so if you have questions throughout our session, please submit them through the Q&A function below. We have a ton of great content for you, but we will reserve time at the end to dive into those with you. Also, if you'd like to revisit or share this content after the fact, we are recording it and we'll be sharing it out via email. I'm Christina Koch with Pendo, and I'm excited to get to introduce you to our presenters who will be guiding our discussion. Our first speaker is Ryan Goldman. Ryan is our VP of Product Marketing here at Pendo. He previously led teams at Cloudera, SignalFX, and Century, worked in international development, and founded an early social network for music lovers. Our second speaker, Chris Condo, is a principal Forrester analyst. Chris serves application development and delivery professionals. He is part of Forrester's AD&D coverage of DevOps tool chains, focusing on continuous integrations and continuous delivery, as well as software development strategies for enabling those strategies. I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Ryan to get us started.
Thanks, Christina. So welcome, everyone, and we'll be talking about two major shifts, key shifts that can drive the enterprise as part of a digital transformation from the disrupted to the disruptor, focusing on the market, the customer, and the business. The first shift is from project to product. As part of digital transformation, a lot of the discussion and a lot of the investment over the past few years has been in systems first, agility, to understand what can digital actually mean in the context of traditional business. That's great, but it becomes a cost center. As part of the response to that, organizations started to think about the relationship between the developer and the operations, how to be nimble, how to be faster, how to be able to respond and collaborate in a more meaningful way. Also great, but it really focuses on organizational and operational concerns, as opposed to the market where a lot of the intelligence actually exists. Recently, we've seen the rise of product operations. This focus on the product as opposed to digital products, as opposed to digital projects, is the best way to understand what can be done and make the product a strategic center for driving the business and growth. We start to think about, for the enterprise, where do you gather intelligence? What data is important? How do you actually act on that data and respond in the most meaningful way? How do you basically take your digital strategy and make it a value driver and increase the business objectives as opposed to the cost centricity of your investments?
Hi, this is Chris Condo, analyst with Forrester. Thank you very much. So one of the things that's very interesting, and I thought I might just sort of introduce myself a little bit and say, you might be wondering, why is this Forrester analyst who covers CI and CD and application development delivery talking about project to product? Well, it turns out that many teams are struggling to actually, understand the end-to-end experience. So the customer experience, we talk about that a lot at Forrester, the complete end-to-end user experience the customer has with your product. And it's really important for companies to realize, and for development teams to realize, that when they're delivering a product, when they're creating software, that they actually understand that it's going to be used by a customer at the end, and they're going to think about that as a product, not necessarily as a project, as a product. And so by thinking that way, and by teams refocusing their attention onto this product focus from just the simple project focus, we think good things can happen, and those agile and DevOps wheels that Ryan was showing can be put to optimal use and applied directly to how products can be created and sustained and maintained in a very agile manner. So one of the interesting things people might say is like, all right, great, customer experience is important, blah, blah, blah. We're going to just focus on getting things out the door really quickly, or we're going to focus on just, our Scrum team's activities. We have all these work items we have to do. We have a big pile of requirements we have to manage. Well, it turns out that if you don't focus on the customer experience, you're kind of missing the big picture. And what I mean by big picture, I mean the financial big picture. At Forrester, we actually have a mathematical equation that can correlate the customer experience delivered by your product or service to actual revenue. we've actually gone through, and this is just a small cross-section of the various vertical industries that we've analyzed. This is 110,000, 111,000 almost consumers, 18 and over, who interact with a brand over the last 12 months. And this is from 2018. Our 2019 survey the data should be out pretty soon. But regardless, if you take a look at this, right, an automotive manufacturer can make a 1-point improvement in their customer experience index, and they can see almost a $50 per element, per auto, whatever, onto their bottom line. You might say, well, is that really a big deal? Well, if you're selling, millions of cars, $50 is a lot of money. And you might say, all right, well, let's say it adds up to 879 million, even cut that in half, $400 million or 500 million. Is 500 million not worth it for your software engineering team to take a second look or a third look at what the customer is actually expecting to make sure that they're actually delivering an elegant customer experience? A lot of times, just changing your focus, just changing your approach to how you deliver products doesn't really require a lot of money. It just requires focusing your priorities in the right way to actually maximize your customer experience. Now, again, this is a correlation. There's no cause and effect here, but the fact of the matter, we've gone through and done this survey, and it holds up pretty solid. Here's another thing you should know. Most companies are just doing okay, like middle of the road. If you look at this score of, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, different elements of customer experience, 0 of the customers that we interview get 0 of the brands get excellent customer experience, and only 16 or 15%, depending on which year you look at, are getting good experience. Most of us are just doing an okay job at it, and these are some of the best brands in the industry. So customers are very finicky. They are very, very judgmental, and they expect excellent customer experience, and they're not going to give away good scores for free. They expect you to earn it. And so that does mean that you need to put in effort. That does mean you need to think about how you're doing this. And that's why we say you really need to start thinking about these things as products rather than projects. So here's something interesting. 69% of business-connected developers rated improving the customer experience as a higher critical priority. But only 39% of siloed developers believe the same. So we kind of segmented these particular audiences. We took a look at our survey of 3,200 developers, and we correlated those that said that improving customer experience is important. They said we are part of a business-related team that's developing products. And then these 39% of siloed developers we are in an engineering team. We are on a software development team, but we're separate from the business. We're separate from those organizations. So what does that mean? There's a bit of throw it over the wall going on here, right? There's a bit of somebody creates a UX design, somebody creates the flow. They hand it off to a software development team in a very waterfall approach. Sure, that software development team might go ahead and try to do it in an agile way, but at the end of the day, that's a waterfall approach. Then they have to ship it out to their customer, and that feedback loop could take longer than necessary to find out whether or not you're doing a good job. Being connected, actually, and focusing on improving the customer experience is how teams should be aligned. So a product approach brings the customer into the software development process. So let's take a look at how. So first of all, the first thing at Forrester that we recommend, and we don't recommend this because we just thought it's a good idea. This is actually how the leading companies are organizing around integrated product teams. These integrated product teams are on multiple squads or multiple teams, whatever you want to call it, feature crews, and each one of them owns a particular element or a particular product or feature of your overall product portfolio. So if you have a big travel website, maybe one team owns the search engine, another one owns the financial transactions and the booking back end, and another one might own other pieces of that particular, maybe it's the user account management piece. But each one of them looks at that in a very holistic way and understands how to manage that particular piece so that they can do the best job to deliver that product to their customer. Around them are services teams that are there throughout the entire process to help them be successful. If it's a security team, They have early insight into what this team is doing. They understand if these teams have critical data or sensitive issues, that sensitive transactions that need to be processed. If it's agile coaches, they know how to help out. If it's architecture or operations, they have very early access to what these teams are doing and provide advice and guidance all the way. But the difference in this particular model is that all of these people sort of have skin in the game. It's their responsibility to make sure that this product team is successful. So if the product team is held up by security, the security team is held accountable for that. If the product team is held up by the operations team because they weren't ready for them, whatever, well, that's on the operations team. Everyone needs to be part of this process. And if the integrated product team isn't communicating out or inviting in these other cross-functional teams, it's on them to do that. And all of these people have collective ownership of a product versus just I'm doing my project, I'm getting my work done, and I don't care what happens afterwards. It's really important to have this product focus and this sort of holistic view of how we're going to succeed and focus on the customer.
And one of the most interesting things about this diagram is that everyone has access to really good data. The data isn't about trying to understand a model that is based on speculation or interview. It's based on behavior within the product, which is really compelling because it means that your roadmap and your decisions tie into a meaningful source of intelligence.
Yeah, exactly, right? So the whole idea is that if you're really doing pure agile development, agile means you're iterating and learning. Test and learn is another way to think about it, right? So you're putting product out the door, the product manager, the product team, other market analysis are looking at what's going on, looking at the behaviors, and they're bringing it right back into the whole prioritization. How are you managing your technical debt? How are you balancing, critical bug fixes versus, new features versus, platform specific issues about updating and upgrading and making things more scalable. If you don't have that insight, as Ryan was talking about, if you don't have that real-time data that's based on what the customer is doing and how things are working, it's really hard to navigate that, and everyone's just taking the best guess. So here's someone told me that this looks like the flux capacitor, which I kind of, if you're a fan of Back to the Future, you know what we're talking about. Otherwise, I'm dating myself. But we call this balancing priorities with the customer experience, right? And so on the left-hand side, you have this sort of Y-shaped diagram showing that sentiments come in from the customer, from the application development team, and from the executives, and they all sort of meet and they don't go anywhere. They all hit a dead end because there's no sort of product thinking, right? The development team is thinking about their priorities, the executives are thinking of their priorities, the customers are just wishing people would listen to them. When you have a product team, the whole idea is to sort of triangulate around these three major stakeholders so that you can balance the priorities against what the customer needs, preferences, and concerns are. And so if executives are saying we want to grow market share, then the application development and the product team can think about, all right, well, how do we maybe create a compelling feature that customers will want? If customers are complaining that there's too many timeouts or there's too many issues with your product or they can't find what they're looking for, that gets back into the product organization and you can say, hey, listen, I know we want to expand market share, but right now our product isn't performing the way customers expect. Let's invest a little bit more time in the user experience to make sure that we solve that so that while we're investing in new initiatives and new strategies, we can continue to keep our current customers happy and move that forward. So there's a whole multi-pronged approach that is available to you when you treat things and work in a product team. And again, so one of the other interesting things is people a lot of times say, oh, well, we're doing DevOps, so we're all set. Well, guess what? You can't do DevOps. It's not like something you buy. It's not something you install in a box. DevOps is a real cultural change. And combining Agile and DevOps together is really the best world for getting what we call fast iterations, but getting them out the door quickly. This particular diagram is sort of an analogy, right? You have this yin and yang, the two go together. Speed and agility, hey, if you're driving a Ferrari, it's great. But if you're driving it on a potholed street of Boston or San Francisco, you're not going very far. What you need is a nice 4-lane highway with no stop signs, right? That's DevOps. So DevOps is sort of a combination of technology, but it's also the ability for the teams to work together, to have common language, to understand how the development team, the operations team, the product team, everybody can work together on a common platform so that you can get product out the door quickly, get it in front of your customer, measure, understand what's going on, bring it back into the Agile process. Without these two things, all these multiple things working together, it's really hard to accelerate your delivery of value to your customer. And another interesting thing that product teams do, I don't think we brought it into here from the statistical point of view, but when we actually did a data cut on folks that are doing business-like things and thinking about customer experience, those developers are also more likely to use experimentation. And what we mean by experimentation is that the development team or the product team is actually inviting people in to try to use their product, whether it's on a platform or actually in-house doing testing on paper mock-ups, if you will. Or they're doing A/B testing, where they're comparing two very similar experiences to try to find out which one customers prefer, which ones get customers their objectives quicker, and it involves creating premises and experiments. It's somewhat sophisticated, but it's also very helpful because you're able to actually decide is this new feature better than the old one it's replacing, and if it's not, why isn't it? And don't change it on the customer because they're not going to be happy. And then the last one is this idea of feature flags. The idea that continuous integration and continuous delivery can all happen in a single trunk. All your features can be delivered to the production environment and tested using a feature flag with a system for controlling who has access to it. And then you can progressively expose these features to customers, whether they're in beta groups, whether it's just test subjects, or whether it's a certain percentage of your population. You have the ability to progressively release these features because they're already in production. What does that do? It decouples your development team's delivery capability from the business team's desire to control when features get turned on and who they get turned on to. So feature management really is the realm of the product team, of the marketing team. They know when they want to turn these features on. They don't want to be held sort of hostage, if you will, by the development team and when they can actually deliver it. So it's much better when you can create a clear demarcation between the delivery team's responsibility and the product and the marketing team's responsibility. One is to actually deliver the code to the production system. The other one is to decide when, where, and who to expose those new features to.
Hey, Chris, for enterprises that are making these kinds of investments and getting sophisticated about how they build and iterate on their products, do you see a difference between a customer-led philosophy and a product-led philosophy?
I do. So, when people think about being product-led, I think they sort of take a more, this is my opinion, they take a more holistic approach where they take the customer's opinion, but then they also balance it against, all right, so we know customers want all these features, but at the same time, we also know that looking down the road, there are other capabilities that we need to add. So they need to balance the priority of making the customer instantly happy with how are we going to keep and retain customers in the future. And so that involves some tricky prioritization where you say, all right, well, here's a thing that's going to improve our platform so it can be more scalable. When do we do that? Do we do it now and put off some customer nice to haves, or do we do the nice to haves now and then do the platform updates? And so, but having that information about what's driving your customers' satisfaction rates can help you set those priorities rather than just saying, well, today looks like a good day. Let's, completely rewrite our platform and put everything on hold. There's nothing more annoying than just making an uninformed decision like that. Or, all we're going to do is listen to the customer and we're going to forget about the future because all we need to do is keep the customer satisfied. Well, the problem with that is that you can keep your customers satisfied in your current platform, but if you're not moving your platform into the future, you'll quickly find that another competitor could enter your space and outmaneuver you. So you have to keep your eye on those things. So, to wrap it all up on this particular piece, product-centric devs are more likely to adopt modern practices. It's like I was saying earlier, 46% use design thinking versus 25%, 61% use agile versus 52%, 48% use DevOps versus 30%, and 33% use value stream management versus 14%. So, really big differences between different teams and their practices. It's quite startling, actually.
And this is really important when you think about the tooling and the sources of data. Being able to have a perspective on what your objectives are and what your goals are is the main fact that informs the shift from project to product. Historically, we said, okay, you have to know your requirements. You have to be, as a product manager or UX designer, focused on delivering the things that have been set out in front of you in order to hit a timeline. Instead, we're saying with the right kind of data, with the right kind of perspective on what the deliverables are, and a sense of strategy and a seat at the table, you're going to start thinking through iteration. You're going to start thinking through, well, my product is the source of truth. It is flexible, but it also is a different experience for different users. And our goal is to move people along a journey and towards some kind of better outcome, both for them and for us as a company. It's a major shift in the way we think, and it's a major shift in terms of the requirements for a product organization and product operations to actually be successful.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the way we think about this is that before, a lot of these factors that went into decision making, that went into strategy and design, were in silos, or they were chronological. We thought of the product as the digital product as just one part of the experience, as opposed to what we think about today is it can actually be the surface for interaction for all things. Like I've said before, it is the cleanest data in that we're not looking for someone to enter it. It is derived directly from behaviors and interactions with the digital product itself. And we're able to use it as a surface for not only learning about the user, but satisfying their needs. We can sell more effectively because we're able to use the product itself as the interface for providing offers. We can ask questions and understand better how the onboarding and education work by setting up these experiments and having them be focused on different cohorts of users. This is a major fundamental way of thinking about your strategy for the first time, as your digital product being the center of excellence for how your users understand what they should get from your business. Not just your major good or service, but the elements of the journey that are part of an application, whether web or mobile, that contribute to their well-being and their fulfillment of expectations.
Great. So I think now we're going to talk
about the next shift. It's outputs to outcomes. For the first time, the product organization is in a position where they're not simply trying to ship code and keep it on a schedule and satisfy certain Scrum requirements. They're now thinking about, how can I lever business outcomes that the CEO actually cares about? If we're trying to drive growth, if we're trying to decrease the cost of customer acquisition, if we're thinking about the flywheel model, where a digital product is actually responsible for not only converting someone for the first time or having them pay us as a user, but then actually growing our relationship and turning them into loyalists who then also drive bigger relationships and lifetime value and higher dollars over time. That is a fundamental difference in the way we've thought about the role of the digital product in the past.
Great. So thanks, Ryan. So one of the things that people often talk about is like, well, what do you mean by, outputs to outcomes? When we think about outputs, it's measure what you produced or your organization's activities are. But output measures do not address the value or impact of the services for your clients. And that's why it's important to think about outcomes, right? Outcome is the level of performance or achievement that occur because of the activity or services your organization provided. So thinking about this, allows development teams to rethink their, what their contribution is. Like, did I close, how many story points did I close or whatever? So think about this: outputs, tasks completed, bugs fixed, releases pushed, hours completed, story points, lines of code. But outcomes are really kind of more important because that's what actually matters. And outcomes would be like, improved customer experience, feature utilization improved, higher transactions per minute, lower latency, greater stability, fewer customer issues. Just to give you an example, we were talking to a customer who they were measuring uptime by whether or not the systems were running or not. And then they had an outage. And what it turned out was that there was an API that wasn't able to connect to another service. But everything showed up, everything was running. It's just that they weren't measuring the right thing. They were measuring this other activity. And what they really needed to be measuring, they said, was like the number of transactions they were processing. And what happened was the transactions went to zero. And that should have been a red flag that something was going on, that something bad is happening, because that's an outcome of all the work that you're doing. And so, if you're a development team and you're testing for performance, and you're not thinking about, how can I lower the latency of web page loads? How can I make sure the product is more stable so users have a more satisfying, customer experience? Then you're kind of focused on the wrong thing. You're just focused on checking off boxes and getting things done. You're not really placing your focus in the right area. So here's another interesting thing, and this is something that we've noticed from our research. So my research chain started with CI and CD, then it went into this tool called value stream management tools, which I think we'll cover in a minute. But then this whole thing turned into, what does it mean to be product-led? What does it mean to deliver business value? And that all came back to this idea of, how do you turn KPIs into objective and key results? And objectives and key results are the things that your team should be working on at a high level. So every product should have an OKR or several OKRs about what it means to actually be successful. And then you need to take the KPIs that are indicators of those things and convert them or feed them into those OKRs to make sure that you're actually getting those OKRs completed and that you're hitting the mark when it comes to delivering the outcomes that you want to. So I kind of gave you sort of a precursor to this. So this idea of value stream management, and value stream mapping. So we did research at Forrester and discovered that many clients who were using automated tool chains were finding that they had no transparency into these tools. They went from kind of knowing what was going on when they had waterfall to these automated Scrum teams, with CI and CD tools, and not being able to predict anything anymore. And what happened was all these tools became sort of islands of automation. All these processes became sort of black boxes. And furthermore, as teams got more sophisticated in what they were delivering, more steps were added to the process, but no one knew about them. So the way to solve that problem or get transparency is, first of all, do a value stream mapping exercise where you go through every single step from idea to value delivered and say, what are all the steps it takes to get this particular feature out the door? So this is sort of a lens of process optimization, where you would take a look at every single step. How long does it take to do some processing time? How long does it take to do a lead time? And then you do a difference and realize that, hey, the lead time or the total elapsed time to deliver this feature was maybe 123 days, but it was only 39 days of actual processing. That means there's 84 days of waste in my process that I can optimize. Then the next step is this idea of value stream management, where you can actually use an application, which we've been researching, to allow you to actually get real-time data and statistics on how your process is going, so that you can get what I would call like a living value stream map. And it's very interesting because we've actually doing some research, and we have the next slide will show you some of the KPIs that people have been getting. So we said, adopters of value stream management tools are matching KPIs to business value to make sure that their development teams are actually delivering on value and delivering on the promise to their customers for excellent customer experience. And so if you take a look at this, it's hard to get a KPI that's a CX score, so I'm going to skip that one. But increased customer web service traffic, that's certainly something that can be measured by an application monitoring tool. Increased web sales, that's certainly something that you can get from your own database. If you're a delivery-led adopter, you can use deployment frequency and lead time for changes. And these things have an equation, equate to certain business value, where getting new features to customers faster, being more adaptable, higher revenue and lower cost of sale when you can restore service more quickly, change failure rate being lower, reduce the cost of outages and bug fixes. Those are all tangible results that come from measuring KPIs that can tell you if you're moving the needle or not on delivering business value. And we also found that these early adopters were starting with, simple tools that were already automated, that were easy to understand. And we call this the VSM backbone, where you have agile planning and management, CI/CD, and release automation. Now, what we hope to see is that in this coming year, as we continue our research, that other things like requirements management, source code management, app user analytics, test management, and issue management all start becoming part of this whole value stream management tool set, so that whether you're in the middle of the delivery and you're a director of engineering or a development lead, you can see how your team's performing. If you're in the product side of the house, you can look at a collection of products to see how they're being delivered. Are they being delivered on time? What's the value being delivered on those? You can look at it more like a portfolio than just a bunch of discrete projects. They all are connected together. They all collectively deliver the customer experience to your end users. And so you want to be able to get that kind of holistic view that we're hoping that these tools that show a lot of promise will be able to do. So adopting modern practices provides a lot better outcomes. We did a survey with a bunch of Agile experts, and this is what we found, is that when you combine Agile and DevOps together, you get, and when you use modern business practice, modern development practices, you achieve faster business value, a 41 to 69% ratio. Greater frequency of delivery goes up by about 8%, improved technical quality, 30 to 40%, and improved functional quality about, again, 30 to 40%. So teams who are applying these modern software development practices, team approach, and automation tools that give them visibility are actually seeing real changes.
And so what this means for the outputs to outcomes transition is thinking through what are the challenges that you can actually address with your product and with a better understanding of the behaviors and objectives of your customer, even of your user before they become a customer. Historically, we've limited ourselves to thinking through simply feeding the timelines of the development organization. But as product operations takes hold, we start to think through what is the data for, and it's actually for shaping the business. For the first time in a long time, the digital product actually is able to return on investment much, much faster than pretty much any other undertaking for the organization, not only in terms of being able to capture revenue quicker, but also to iterate much more quickly, and to be able to set the customer on a path towards the outcomes that you actually require in order to drive growth, be competitive, and entrench more deeply over the course of your relationship. So we have a basic framework for this, and we think of it as the product experience as opposed to just the journey. We align a lot of the different stages of what you're building for to the way you actually capture and measure value. So first, obviously, onboarding, being able to not only create a product experience and set of features that are aligned to what you want or how the most common or highest value cohort behaves, but being able to get some level of customization and personalization so that you're understanding the different needs and behaviors and challenges of the user and taking out some of that friction, communicating with them directly inside of the application. Again, it's the most flexible and in some ways useful surface. Next is driving adoption, making sure that as part of onboarding and beyond, the user is able to find the thing that is most important to them to actually drive value and to return value to their organization and to their customers. The third part is retention. So being able to think through, okay, we have them. We've done the best job we can during the early stages. We've exposed the most important features and most important experiences. But what can we do to change and to honor their objectives and to understand that their team has evolved, and so the product has to evolve with it. Usually we talk about growth being the last stage, where we're trying to gain advocacy and go deeper and trying to understand how can we expand. Where can we generate more dollars and, again, return to this flywheel concept where we're always thinking about the future. But we now begin to think about this as an iterative process, that not only are we gaining insight into what is working today and how do we actually expand on it to gain greater retention and to expand more quickly, but then to say, what can we do to add on to the experience? What is the secondary and tertiary experience? How do we actually put this into new apps? How do we think about our own internal processes? So this is where planning comes from. Trying to capture more and more information about the user experience from the user's mouth. So not only the quantitative data that comes along with being able to monitor your product and monitor the behavior, but also asking the right questions within the context of the user's experience, letting them be proactive about their input, taking that feedback and doing something with it so that you're always returning them to a point where they're figuring out new value and you're putting them back on the trail towards a new level of adoption and retention.
All right. Thank you so much, Ryan. And thank you, Chris, for leading this discussion and sharing insights into your experience and research. Before we jump into the questions from the audience, I do want to remind everyone to join us for Pendemonium, our Pendo conference coming up here September 10th through 11th. It's fast approaching, so be sure to get your team registered soon. Let's go ahead and dive into some of the questions that came in throughout the conversation. The first question that came in from Cody is around suggestions for how to implement user/customer focused product ops when end users or buyers are difficult to access for product feedback.
That's a great question. It depends on what do you mean, what the meaning of difficult is. If the problem is that physical access to them and getting input is hard, you can use tools to instrument the customer user experience. You can also, one of the things that Forrester does, it has a very simple poll on their website that every time you do a search, it's just like a yes, no, is this helpful or not helpful? If the problem is that you're like downstream or too far upstream from your customer to actually have access to them, like maybe you create something and then a third-party reseller actually sells it and they're the ones who actually touch the customer, that's a little bit more difficult. You might have to find ways to instrument code and then clean it and then get it back to you in some ways that allows you to get information that doesn't feel like the third party is actually sharing information with you that they shouldn't be. The other way to do it though is if you do know who your customers are and you're trying to get input, there are platforms that you can actually invite people into, that the platform will actually help you find the right customers and invite them in to use beta features and get their direct feedback. These platforms, like user testing, for example, or user Zoom, allow you to actually, they expect the user to actually speak out loud as they're using the product and tell you why they are doing something or what they don't like or what they do like as they're traversing certain tasks and requirements that you're asking them for. The other one is A/B testing, where if you can instrument the code so you can do a test between two different features, you can actually get the customers, and you have to have an hypothesis that can actually be measured and a result that's actually something that could be calculated. These platforms like from Optimizely or Split or others can actually go through and tell you which of the winning strategies customers prefer.
So I love this question, and Chris nailed it in terms of the first challenge, which is the instrumentation. So if anyone's familiar with Pendo's recent acquisition of a company called Receptive based in the UK, we believe that they were doing a phenomenal job of addressing this problem, making it really easy in the context of the user's experience and what they were doing within the product to be able to give input and feedback on what's important to them. But there's a second challenge that goes with that, and it's being able to understand and give the right kind of weight to that data as it comes in. We call it product demand intelligence. So being able to not only tag that information, but enrich it with the data that's coming from your product behaviors, so that we have some sense of who is this, what have they done in the past, how do we get that both qualitative and quantitative view so that we understand, like, is this valuable data not only because it either qualifies or confirms some of our assumptions or gives us a new idea that we hadn't had before, but also aligns to the highest value possible from the cohort from which it's coming, understanding the role, the title, the context, and all the things that actually drive a belief in delivering value. So for anyone who, as Christina mentioned, is coming to Pendemonium next month in Raleigh, you'll get a first view of how we're solving this problem for our customers.
Awesome. So the next question that came in is aligned to the two shifts. So really, who should be owning the and operationalizing these shifts within the business?
So that's a good question. So, what I'm seeing from, and I'm kind of over on the software development side, is that, typically companies that are making these shifts, you make a overt plan to create a product team if they don't already have one. One of the problems that we see at Forrester is that many of the businesses that we deal with aren't software companies. They're insurance companies, they're banks, they're companies that deliver, some sort of real, I don't want to say real, but a traditional kind of service to their customers. And they never thought of software as their product. They thought of it as a technology necessary to deliver their product. Well, now they're thinking about that differently. And they're saying, okay, well, we have product managers for our insurance policy. We have product managers for our banking instruments, but we don't have any product managers for our software platform or how we deliver our services to our customers. So the first thing they're doing is they're recognizing the need for a product organization. So they're shifting away from the old kind of model. It still works, but where you have a sort of a proxy product owner on a Scrum team whose job is to make sure the requirements all look like they match what the actual customer wants, and replacing that with a product team that actually is embedded into the development team and actually, is part of that development process from the beginning to the end, resolving issues, answering questions. If they don't have the answer, they go right to where the source of the data is from the instrumentation or whatever data they have from other, intelligence teams. And the whole idea is that the development team is constantly up to date on what's necessary to deliver value. That comes from it needs to come from a pretty high level to create an organization like that and to bring these cross-functional teams together, typically at the CTO or CIO level, to actually make those kind of tangible changes to the organization.
Yeah, and that Chris really nails it. And coming from the product side as opposed to the development side, I tie this back to a third phase of digital transformation. When we're talking about companies that are not ISVs, they're not software companies, they're enterprises who have been in business for years and years and years, making and selling a thing or a service that is not necessarily experienced through a computer or a mobile device. This is a pretty big undertaking, and a lot of the conversation and a lot of the investments in the past decade or so has been in just like building a digital capability for the first time. That is hard, and you start to ask yourself, what's it for? And that what's it for question is the second phase, and how do we do it better? And then the last phase is what we're talking about today, which is, in my belief, the role is a kind of product organization, a product operations organization that includes the digital strategist and includes the innovation person and includes parts of the business operations team. It even includes marketing and sales, depending on the makeup of your product and your family tree within the company. But the most important thing is that the data has to actually be actionable in the context of not just your business strategy, but your product strategy itself. And that drives the real transformation. So I would heavily include a product operations goal here for being able to gather this intelligence, to act on it, and to think about, like, what does the surface mean, and what does this journey turn into in the context of really being focused on product experience tying to business strategy.
Wonderful. So the next question we have, what are good first steps to implement in an organization that currently has a siloed approach to product development instead of a more integrated product approach?
Yeah, so in that sense, I think it's important to, if you can't necessarily break down those organizational walls, it just might not be practical, right? I mean, we're dealing with real companies and real people, and sometimes these organizations are quite large. The best thing you can do is try to do almost what Spotify does, right? If you look at the Spotify model, even though everyone works in a separate team, and you might think, well, this is completely orthogonal to how siloed teams work, but let's just play with it for a minute. If you think about how those teams work, they actually have this concept of a guild which is that these virtual people who are related by the fact that they have a common interest just meet and they discuss, whether it's, best practices for delivering some sort of technology or how to make customers happy. And you could come up with this sort of like a matrix kind of organization that stretches across these silos, use Slack channels, use collaborative tools, and meet more often than maybe you normally would in these siloed teams to try to bridge the gap. Even though you're in separate teams, even though you have separate management, at the end of the day, everybody reports back to like the company's CEO, and his job is to, revenue, customer growth, strong business financials. And that's what everybody else's job is as well. So if you can sort of tie those things together and demonstrate how your efforts to bridge those gaps, in these temporary manners maybe, or maybe permanent until for now, are achieving these goals, I don't see why you shouldn't be able to accomplish similar things. It's just not as easy when you don't have common incentives. And that's usually the biggest hindrance, actually, is that when we talk to companies about what's stopping their digital transformation, they say, well, I've been given the mantle to be the digital transformer, but the next person down hasn't been. And they're like, well, my job is to make sure everything goes out the door safe and secure, and I'm not going to transform, I'm not going to adopt CI/CD because it looks too dangerous to me, and my job is to keep things safe. And so when people have different sets of incentives and different sets of goals, it can make it hard. It's possible to bridge the gap. It's possible to make these things work, but it does take a lot more effort and collaboration.
Yeah, this model of outputs to outcomes is really important. And Chris touched on this earlier when he talked about OKRs. Setting OKRs for the entire organization that are aligned to the either quarterly or annual business goals is the true test of how you get started. Making sure that we're shifting away from traditional KPIs. Sorry, not away from KPIs, but having something in addition to KPIs. With KPIs alone, it's too easy to just keep the lights on and have people not be incented to stretch or think about the market and the business and the competition, and instead only think about their day-to-day practices and workflows. So really pushing towards like everyone is responsible for some contribution to revenue growth and pipelines. Everyone in the organization, regardless of role, is responsible in some way towards new monetization strategies. This is the way to get started.
All right, one last question before we wrap. The question came in around how a company with an older legacy product can approach the product ops strategy when the company has to constantly deal with burning customer requests. So I think we touched on this a little bit, but I think elaborating on the product ops strategy in the context of an old legacy product is really the question.
Yeah, that's a tough one, right? So people have this, they have a legacy product. It's not easy to maybe maintain it or move it forward. And then, you're dealing with these burning customer requests, and they're not easy to maybe fulfill because of this product's architecture. And so there's a couple different ways to do it, but I think I'm just going to bounce right back to what Ryan was talking about, OKRs. And the idea is to understand, what are we trying to achieve with our customer base? And is it that, these customer requests are really the highest priority, or is our highest priority really that we're going to go out of business if we don't create a new platform, that, we don't get stuck with these legacy issues? And so trying to balance those really requires leadership to be bold and to challenge, their current status quo to say, we are going to do some of these customer requests. We are going to maybe take approaches that allows us to fix some of these issues. But at the same time, we recognize the fact that we're never going to climb out of the hole if we don't fix things. And so they either need to invest, bring in a partner, or do something to make things change. Because if that legacy product isn't amenable to change, isn't amenable to moving things forward in an expedient manner, then you have a real issue. If the problem is just tools and technologies or skill sets or expertise, those things also need to be looked at. You need to look at the whole thing as a holistic problem, as like, why can't we get stuff done? Do a value stream map, find out how long it's taking you to get from customer issue to resolution, and find out what's holding you up. You might find out that it's not technology, that it's really culture, or that it's expertise, or that you're missing certain key personnel in the entire chain of delivering value to your customer.
Yeah, I see this as a data silo issue. So a lot of organizations fall into the trap of saying, if I just had more data, then I'd be able to make better decisions. But the problem is, especially with these long-standing organizations who are going through these transformations, keeping the data in silos to answer only small questions becomes problematic because you become indentured to that data. You find one piece of insight and you're like, oh, this confirms my belief, and so therefore I have to respond to it. You get the squeakiest wheel, or the one biggest customer in terms of current value, and you start to trap yourself in responding to only that. But then I think about companies who are doing this well. So, Pendo customers. I spoke to some folks from Pitney Bowes earlier this week. A 100-year-old company. I think of ADP, who has an entire variety of product lines. Some of which have digital interfaces, some of which do not, and some of the special sauce for them has been looking at data across their applications, looking at data across the interactions, looking at data across their product lines, and being able to say, like, we're understanding inputs, feedback, we're enriching it with the things we know, we're asking better questions, and we're not putting ourselves in silos. We're trying to understand holistically, and we've said this word holistically a lot, holistically, how do we build and optimize and create according to these larger business opportunities, as opposed to just trying to fix small problems all the time. This is really, really key. Having a product operations strategy, having a product-led strategy makes all the difference.
All right, wonderful. So thank you guys so much for taking the time to join us. And thank you both Chris and Ryan for sharing your insights and answering all of these questions. I have Chris's contact information up on the screen for everyone, and also we'll be sharing out the presentation after the fact. But thank you guys, and hopefully you'll be tuning into our next webinar.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.